Studying twins, a unique opportunity. Read, listen and practice. The scientific study of twins goes back to the late 19th century, when Francis Galton, an early geneticist, realized that they came in two varieties: identical twins born from one egg and non-identical twins that had come from two. That insight turned out to be key, although it was not until 1924 that it was used to formulate what is known as the twin rule of pathology, and twin studies really got going. The twin rule of pathology states that any heritable disease will be more concordant, that is, more likely to be jointly present or absent, in identical twins than in non-identical twins, and, in turn, will be more concordant in non-identical twins than in non-siblings. Early work, for example, showed that the statistical correlation of skin mole counts between identical twins was 0.4, while non-identical twins had a correlation of only 0.2. A score of 1.0 implies a perfect correlation, while a score of 0 implies no correlation. This result suggests that moles are heritable, but it also implies that there is an environmental component to the development of moles, otherwise, the correlation in identical twins would be close to 1.0. Twin research has shown that whether or not someone takes up smoking is determined mainly by environmental factors, but once he does so, how much he smokes is largely down to his genes. And while a person's religion is clearly a cultural attribute, there is a strong genetic component to religious fundamentalism. Twin studies are also unraveling the heritability of various aspects of human personality. Traits from neuroticism and anxiety to thrill and novelty-seeking all have large genetic components. Parenting matters, but it does not determine personality in the way that some had thought. More importantly, perhaps, twin studies are helping the understanding of diseases such as cancer, asthma, osteoporosis, arthritis and immune disorders. And twins can be used for ethical, medical experiments. A study that administered vitamin C to one twin and a placebo to the other found that it had no effect on the common cold. The lesson from all of today's twin studies is that most human traits are at least partially influenced by genes. However, for the most part, the age-old dichotomy between nature and nurture is not very useful. Many genetic programs are open to input from the environment, and genes are frequently switched on or off by environmental signals. It is also possible that genes themselves influence their environment. Some humans have an innate preference for participation in sports. Others are drawn to novelty. Might people also be drawn to certain kinds of friends and types of experiences? In this way, a person's genes might shape the environment they act in as much as the environment shapes the actions of the genes. In the past, such research has been controversial. Joseph Mengele, a Nazi doctor working at the Auschwitz extermination camp during the Second World War, was fascinated by twins. He sought them out among arrivals at the camp and preserved them from the gas chambers for a series of brutal experiments. After the war, Cyril Burt, a British psychologist who worked on the heredity of intelligence, tainted twin research with results that appear, in retrospect, to have been rather too good. Some of his data on identical twins who had been reared apart were probably faked. In any case, the prevailing ideology in the social sciences after the war was Marxist and disliked suggestions that differences in human potential might have underlying genetic causes. Twin studies were thus viewed with suspicion. The ideological pendulum has swung back, however, as the Human Genome Project and its aftermath have turned genes into abstract concepts into real pieces of DNA. The role of genes in sensitive areas such as intelligence is acknowledged by all but a few die-hards. The interesting questions now concern how nature and nurture interact to produce particular bits of biology, rather than which of the two is more important. Twin studies, which are a good way to ask these questions, are back in fashion, and many twins are enthusiastic participants in this research. Research at the Twinsburg Festival began in a small way, with a single stand in 1979. Gradually, news spread, and more scientists began turning up. This year, half a dozen groups of researchers were lodged in a specially pitched research tent. In one corner of this tent, Paul Breslin, who works at the Monell Institute in Philadelphia, watched over several tables where twins sat sipping clear liquids from cups and making notes. It was the team's third year at Twinsburg. Dr. Breslin and his colleagues want to find out how genes influence human perception, particularly the senses of smell and taste and those, warmth, cold, pain, tingle, itch, and so on, that result from stimulation of the skin. Perception is an example of something that is probably influenced by both genes and experience. Even before birth, people are exposed to flavors such as chocolate, garlic, mint, and vanilla that pass intact into the bloodstream, and thus to the fetus. Though it is not yet clear whether such prenatal exposure shapes taste perception, there is evidence that it shapes preferences for foods encountered later in life. However, there are clearly genetic influences at work, as well, for example in the ability to taste quinine. Some people experience this as intensely bitter, even when it is present at very low levels. Others, whose genetic endowment is different, are less bothered by it. Twin studies make this extremely clear. Within a pair of identical twins, either both, or neither, will find quinine hard to swallow. Non-identical twins will agree less frequently. On the other side of the tent, Dennis Drana, from the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, in Maryland, was studying hearing. He wants to know what happens to sounds after they reach the ear. It is not clear, he says, whether the sound is processed into sensation mostly in the ear or in the brain. Dr. Drana has already been involved in a twin study that revealed that the perception of musical pitch is highly heritable. At Twinsburg, he is playing different words, or parts of words, into the left and right ears of his twinned volunteers. The composite of the two sounds that an individual reports hearing depends on how he processes this diverse information, and that, Dr. Drana believes, may well be influenced by genetics. Elsewhere in the marquee, Peter Maraldi, of Kent State University in Ohio, was trying to find out whether genes affect an individual's motivation to communicate with others. A number of twin studies have shown that personality and sociability are heritable, so he thinks this is fertile ground. And next to Mr. Maraldi was a team of dermatologists from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. They are looking at the development of skin disease and male pattern baldness. The goal of the latter piece of research is to find the genes responsible for making men's hair fall out. The busiest part of the tent, however, was the queue for forensic science research into fingerprints. The origins of this study are shrouded in mystery. For many months, the festival's organizers have been convinced that the Secret Service, the American government agency responsible for, among other things, the safety of the president, is behind it. When The Economist contacted the Secret Service for more information, we were referred to Steve Nash, who is chairman of the International Association for Identification, IAI, and is also a detective in the Scientific Investigations section of the Marin County Sheriff's Office in California. The IAI, based in Minnesota, is an organization of forensic scientists from around the world. Among other things, it publishes the Journal of Forensic Identification.
Such is our dependence on fossil fuels, and such the volume of carbon dioxide we have already released into the atmosphere, that most climate scientists agree that significant global warming is now inevitable. The best we can hope to do is keep it at a reasonable level, and even that going to be an uphill task. At present, the only serious option on the table for doing this is cutting back on our carbon emissions, but a few countries are making major strides in this regard. The majority are having great difficulty even stemming the rate of increase, let alone reversing consequently. An increasing number of scientists are beginning to explore the alternatives. They are under the banner of geoengineering, generally defined as the intentional large-scale manipulation of the environment. Geoengineering has been shown to work, at least on a small, localized scale, for decades. May Day parades in Moscow have taken place under clear blue skies, aircraft having deposited dry ice, silver iodide, M1, and cement powder to disperse clouds. Many of the schemes now suggested look to do the opposite, and reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the planet. One scheme focuses on achieving a general cooling of the Earth and involves the concept of releasing aerosol sprays into the stratosphere above the Arctic to create clouds of sulfur dioxide, which would, in turn, lead to global dimming. The idea is modeled on historical volcanic explosions, such as that of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines in 1991, which led to a short-term cooling of global temperatures by 0.5 degree Celsius. The aerosols could be delivered by artillery, high-flying aircraft, or balloons. Instead of concentrating on global cooling, other schemes look specifically at reversing the melting at the poles. One idea is to bolster an ice cap by spraying it with water. Using pumps to carry water from below the sea ice, the spray would come out as snow or ice particles, producing thicker sea ice with a higher albedo, the ratio of sunlight reflected from a surface, to reflect summer radiation. Scientists have also scrutinized whether it is possible to block ice flow in Greenland with cables that have been reinforced, preventing icebergs from moving into the sea. Vale-Albert Kallio, a Finnish scientist, says that such an idea is impractical because the force of the ice would ultimately snap the cables and rapidly release a large quantity of frozen ice into the sea. However, Kallio believes that the sort of cables used in suspension bridges could potentially be used to divert, rather than halt, the southward movement of ice from Spitsbergen. It would stop the ice moving south, and local currents would see them float northwards, he says. A number of geoengineering ideas are currently being examined in the Russian Arctic. These include planting millions of birch trees. The thinking, according to Kallio, is that their white bark would increase the amount of reflected sunlight. The loss of their leaves in winter would also enable the snow to reflect radiation. In contrast, the native evergreen pines tend to shade the snow and absorb radiation. Using ice-breaking vessels to deliberately break up and scatter coastal sea ice in both Arctic and Antarctic waters in their respective autumns, and diverting Russian rivers to increase cold water flow to ice-forming areas, could also be used to slow down warming, Kallio says. One, you would need the wind to blow the right way, but in the right conditions, by letting ice float free and head north, you would enhance ice growth. But will such ideas ever be implemented? The major counter-arguments to geoengineering schemes are, first, that they are a cop-out that allows the U.S. to continue living the way we do, rather than reducing carbon emissions, and, second, even if they do work, would the side effects outweigh the advantages? Then there's the daunting prospect of upkeep and repair of any scheme as well as the consequences of a technical failure. I think all of us agree that if we were to end geoengineering on a given day, then the planet would return to its pre-engineered condition very rapidly, and probably within 10 to 20 years, says Dr. Phil Roche, chief scientist for climate change at the U.S.-based Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. That's certainly something to worry about. I would consider geoengineering as a strategy to employ only we manage the conversion to a non-fossil fuel economy. The risk with geoengineering projects is that you can overshoot, says Dr. Dan Hunt, from the University of Bristol. You may bring global temperatures back to pre-industrial levels, but the risk is that the poles will still be warmer than they should be and the tropics be cooler than before industrialization. The main reason why geoengineering is countenanced by the mainstream scientific community is that most researchers have little faith in the politicians to agree, and then bring in the necessary carbon cuts. Even leading conservation organizations believe the subject is worth exploring. As Dr. Martin Summerson, a climate change advisor, says, but human-induced climate change has brought humanity to a position where it is important not to exclude thinking thoroughly about this topic and its possibilities despite the potential drawbacks. If over the coming years, the science US about an ever-increased climate sensitivity of the planet and this isn't unrealistic, then we may be best served by not having to start our thinking from scratch.